I didn't expect to be invited to her wedding, my ex-wife's wedding. Alara, the woman who once held my hand across splintered wood tables and whispered about building a simple, beautiful life. I can still see her, barefoot in the kitchen, laughing at my mess of flour, her arms wrapped around my neck as if nothing else in the world could touch us. Back then, simple wasn't a compromise. It was a choice. Our choice. Or so I thought. Then came the shift. Little things at first. A wrinkle of her nose when I came in smelling of sawdust and cinnamon. The way her compliments turned into suggestions. Maybe you should get a real accountant. Or, don't you want to go back to school? Then, eventually, the outright disdain. She didn't leave during a fight. There wasn't a dramatic crescendo. She just left. A note, a ring on the table, and a voicemail that began with "You deserve more" and ended with "I met someone." That someone turned out to be Roman Eastwell, heir to Eastwell Global. Lavish real estate portfolios, skyscrapers with penthouses that cost more than my entire hometown. The media called him an architect of opulence. I called him a parasite with perfect teeth. When the invitation arrived, thick cardstock, engraved lettering, the kind of thing that cost more than a week's worth of groceries, I nearly tossed it into the fireplace. But then I saw it, scribbled in blue ink on the back. "Come if you want to see how real success looks." Her handwriting, still curved the same way, like she was writing love notes instead of taunts. That's the thing about people like Alara. They mistake silence for surrender. They see stillness and think you've stopped growing. They think if you've stepped out of their orbit, you must be orbiting nothing. I let her believe that. For years, I let the world believe I was just a man with a broken heart and a cabin full of memories. But grief makes for excellent fertilizer. And I've been planting. So I RSVP'd yes. Not for revenge, though I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't cross my mind like a shadow slipping through the back door. I told myself it was for closure, for finality, for the chance to stand in the back, nod politely, and let it all wash away in the glow of her perfect, polished new life. That was the story I rehearsed as I ironed my suit, the one tailored with quiet success, charcoal gray, subtle pinstripe, no label screaming for attention, just enough to look like I belonged. The drive from my cabin to the Eastwell estate was 3 hours of winding roads and sharper memories. I passed old landmarks, places Alara once said she loved because they were untouched by time, places she left behind without a glance. I rolled the windows down, let the spring wind mess up my hair, and turned up the playlist I hadn't touched in years. Her voice used to be in some of those songs. I didn't skip them. I just listened harder to the silence between verses. The estate was ridiculous. Acres of manicured lawn, water fountains that probably had a monthly maintenance crew, gates that shimmered like jewelry. The kind of place built to look expensive even in the dark. I pulled up in my restored 1972 Chevy truck, midnight blue with polished chrome, a labor of love I'd rebuilt bolt by bolt after she left. The valet blinked, hesitated, then held out his hand for the keys. Inside, it was like stepping into another world. Marble floors that stretched forever, crystal chandeliers catching light in 1,000 arrogant angles, waiters with silver trays that sparkled like promises. Everyone was dressed like a magazine spread. And then there was me, calm, composed, and unapologetically grounded. I saw familiar faces. Mira, Fallon, or old friends who once called my home quaint, like it was a charity project. They clustered together, eyeing me like I was a blemish on the guest list. One of them smirked, barely hiding the sneer in her voice. Look what crawled out of the countryside. I didn't blink. Even the best grapes grow from dirt. They laughed, the kind of laughter that echoed off expensive stone but didn't reach their eyes. I didn't care. Their laughter wasn't mine to carry. And then I saw her. Alara. She descended the staircase like it was built for her. Designer lace hugged her frame, her hair pinned in delicate waves that looked effortless and cost thousands. She was radiant, undeniably beautiful, the kind of beauty that glowed more in admiration than in truth. She spotted me immediately. Her eyes flickered, not with surprise, but with calculation. She smiled. "Grayson," she called across the room, her voice theatrical. "So glad you could make it." Heads turned. I stood still. She motioned to the crowd, gathering attention like a ringmaster. "Everyone, this is my ex-husband. He bakes pies, lives in a cabin, and grows his own vegetables. A very simple life." Laughter again, louder this time. Fallon even clapped once, sarcastic. I smiled. A real one. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every laugh was fuel. Every smirk was another layer of armor. Every insult was a seed planted in the soil of something they couldn't see growing beneath the surface. Simple isn't a flaw, I said calmly. It's just a foundation. Some people build towers on sand. They didn't get it. Not yet. But they would. Because I hadn't come to prove anything. I'd come to show them what they missed while they were busy chasing chandeliers. And the best part? The show hadn't even started yet. The Eastwell estate stretched out in front of me like a challenge. It wasn't just big, it was obscene. A palace dressed up as a home, dripping in marble and overcompensation. There were fountains that danced on cue, a valet line longer than some airport terminals, and guests floating around in gowns and tuxedos like they were auditioning for a period drama. But I didn't flinch. I didn't straighten my shoulders or try to make myself fit in. I pulled up in my truck, engine humming low and steady, stepped out in my tailored charcoal suit, and shut the door like I owned the place. Silence followed me like a well-trained dog. Not the kind of silence that comes from awe or admiration. No, this was the kind laced with judgment. People paused mid-sip, mid-sentence. I caught the flicker of confusion in their eyes as they tried to place me. Then recognition. Then amusement. I didn't mind. Let them laugh. They'd been laughing for years. I walked past a row of hedges carved into swans, actual swans, toward the ballroom terrace. The smell of rose water and money hung thick in the air. A quartet played near the back, something classical and forgettable. And then I heard the first voice. "Oh my God," Fallon drawled. "Look what crawled out of the countryside." She was holding a champagne flute, like a weapon. Her hair was shellacked into a bun that probably required scaffolding. She wore a blush-pink gown that screamed wealth and insecurity. Mira stood beside her, smirking, and a third woman I vaguely remembered from some charity brunch Alara once dragged me to tilted her head like I was a new exhibit. "I thought they stopped letting ranch hands into these kinds of events," Mira added. I didn't stop walking. I just smiled politely. Even the best grapes grow from dirt. Fallon blinked. Mira scoffed. The third one stifled a laugh, but I could see the twitch of her lip. That's the thing about rich people. They love a punchline, even when it's aimed at them. Then the crowd parted, and there she was. Alara. My ex-wife looked like a porcelain statue dipped in moonlight. Her gown was custom couture, lace and silk sewn together with vanity. Her smile was rehearsed, camera-ready. Every curl in her hair looked like it had been negotiated by a stylist with a god complex. She walked toward me slowly, one hand grazing her waist like she expected a spotlight to follow her. "Grayson," she said, drawing out the syllables like they were laced with perfume. "So glad you could make it." I watched her eyes dance across the room, making sure people were listening. "Everyone," she announced, gesturing with delicate fingers. "This is my ex-husband. He bakes pies, lives in a cabin, and grows his own vegetables. A very simple life." Laughter. Fallon giggled. Mira raised her glass. Someone in the back whispered something I didn't catch but heard the smugness in. I just nodded. Still bake. Still grow. Still live. There was a brief flicker in her expression, something uncertain, but she recovered quickly, as she always did. "You look neat," she said. "Tailored," I corrected her, lifting one brow. She glanced down at my shoes. Leather, polished, classic. Not flashy, but expensive. The kind of expensive you only recognize if you know where to look. "Didn't think you'd show," she said, lowering her voice now that the audience had wandered off. "You invited me." She smirked. "Roman thought it was bold. I thought it'd be closure. You always liked a dramatic finish." She shrugged. "Better than no finish at all." That was the thing with Alara. She always needed to win. Even when there was no game. Even when the only prize was her own ego being stroked like a cat in sunlight. I looked around. The whole event was a shrine to opulence. Chandeliers hung like icicles, catching the last of the sunset through glass walls. Gold-accented tables bore nameplates carved into crystal. Even the napkins looked like they'd been ironed by angels. "You really went all out," I said. She laughed. "You know Roman. Nothing is ever enough." No, I didn't know Roman, but I knew his type. Raised on expectation, built for image. The kind of man who probably thought dignity was something that could be leased like a penthouse. I turned back toward her. "And what about you, Alara? Is this enough for you?" She stiffened. "It's everything I wanted." "Then I'm happy for you," I said, and meant it, almost. That made her flinch. Not visibly. Not something the cameras would catch. But I knew her too well. I could see the tightening around her mouth, the barely concealed panic behind her lashes. She leaned in. "You look different." "I am different." She hesitated. Still living in that cabin? No, I said. Expanded it. Build a house next to it. Boutique in. Bakery downstairs. Her smile faltered. You always wanted a farm stand, she said, quieter. I always wanted a life I didn't have to escape from. That shut her up. Across the courtyard, Fallon and Mira were pretending not to stare. Roman still hadn't appeared. Maybe he was inside shaking hands with someone important. Or maybe he was hiding in a wine cellar trying to count the cost of this wedding in dollars and doubts. Alara drew in a breath and turned to go, but stopped halfway. Grayson, she said, looking back. You really showed up today. I always do, I said. You just stopped noticing. She walked away without another word, her veil catching the wind for just a second. And in that second, I saw it unravel, not the veil itself, but something beneath it. A part of her confidence, her control, slipping loose thread by thread. And I didn't chase her. Didn't need to. Because every smirk, every insult, every silk-wrapped mockery, they were just crumbs. Crumbs of the past. And I wasn't hungry anymore. The first time I laid eyes on Roman Eastwell in person, he looked exactly like the man you'd expect to marry someone like Alara, sharp features, gel-slicked hair, a smile that came with a price tag. He stepped out from the glass doors of the ballroom like he'd been timed for dramatic effect, buttoning his cream tuxedo jacket with the kind of flourish only old money learns. But that smile, planted, polished, precise, faltered the moment he saw me. His feet froze halfway down the steps. The champagne flute in his hand tilted just enough to spill a thin stream of gold onto the marble floor. His jaw slackened slightly, and in that moment, he looked less like a groom and more like a man who'd just seen his carefully controlled world tilt. Grayson, he muttered, barely loud enough for anyone but me to hear. But the silence that followed his voice, that was for everyone. I turned toward him slowly. No expression, no edge. Just steady. He didn't move. Alara, noticing the sudden pause in momentum, turned around sharply, her gown brushing the marble with a crisp hiss. You know him? She asked Roman, eyes darting between us. Her voice was tight, cautious. Roman didn't answer right away. He just stared at me like he was trying to remember a nightmare he thought he'd buried. Grayson Rourke, he said again, this time a little louder. There was recognition now, and fear tangled in it. His grip tightened around the stem of his glass. What are you doing here? Alara stepped between us slightly, trying to control the moment like she always did when attention shifted in the wrong direction. He was invited, she said quickly, her voice pinched with authority she hadn't earned in years. I thought it would be symbolic. Closure. Roman didn't look at her. He was invited? I lifted a brow. You didn't know? The crowd began to murmur, guests craning their necks, whispers threading through the air like smoke. A few cell phones were already out, discreetly tilted. I spotted a photographer lowering his lens, unsure whether to click or wait for the explosion. I RSVP'd, I said. Didn't expect to be welcomed so warmly, though. Roman looked like someone had pressed a thumb to the base of his throat. His complexion paled beneath his golden tan. You're that Grayson Rourke? Alara turned fully now, her face drawn. What do you mean, that Grayson? Roman didn't answer. His eyes never left mine. She snapped her fingers slightly, irritated. Roman, what's going on? I chuckled, low and easy. It's funny, I said, how someone can try so hard to erase a name from memory and still end up haunted by it. Roman stepped down the last marble stair with mechanical precision. His confidence, his composure was unraveling thread by thread. I wasn't smug about it. Not yet. There was no satisfaction in watching someone fall unless they'd earned the crash. I thought you were just a small-town guy, he said quietly. The bakery. The cabin. Still have both, I said. But you missed the expansion. He blinked. That little bakery now anchors Sage and Forge, I continued. We specialize in boutique hospitality, lodges, cafes, farm-to-table retreats. Quiet brand. Tight margins. Excellent returns. Roman opened his mouth, then closed it again. You tried to buy us last quarter, I added. Your legal team lowballed the offer. Thought we were a struggling startup desperate for exposure. Alara's brows furrowed. Wait. That's Sage and Forge. Roman didn't nod, didn't confirm. He didn't have to. The look on his face said enough. You said the owner was anonymous, she whispered to him, but loud enough for the crowd nearby to catch it. You said they wouldn't last the year. I could see the sweat glisten at his temple. The guests were shifting now, watching us the way people watch an expensive painting fall off a wall. And you said he was nobody, she added, voice rising. You told me he ran a farm stand and built furniture on weekends. Roman's mouth worked like he wanted to say something. Anything. But no sound came. I kept my tone even. You'd be surprised what a nobody can do with time and soil and silence. Some things grow better when they're left alone. Myra's voice cracked through the tension from the side. Is this a PR thing? Are you too? What is this? I was invited, I said, voice level. Didn't expect the entertainment. Roman finally turned to Alara, eyes wide. You told me he was out of the picture. You said he was stuck in the past. Alara's face had gone pale, her hands clenched at her sides. He was, she snapped. Until now. No, I said quietly. I've always been here. You just weren't looking in the right direction. Silence fell hard. No music. No clinking glasses. Just the weight of realization settling in. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was truth. Unwelcome and unannounced, but truth nonetheless. Roman looked at the crowd, at the investors standing near the champagne fountain, the photographers hovering like hawks, the guests pulling back just slightly, unsure whose side they were supposed to be on now. He looked at me. Then he looked at Alara. And in that moment, I saw something shift. Not rage. Not panic. Fear. The kind of fear that blooms when you realize your empire was built on borrowed image and false assumptions. I didn't need to say anything else. I'd said enough. So I turned and walked past them. Through the rows of gold chairs, past the waiters frozen mid-pour, past Fallon and Mira who suddenly weren't laughing anymore, and made my way to the catering table. I picked up a cupcake. Chocolate base, buttercream frosting piped in swirls. I took a bite. It was dry. I turned to the nearest waiter. Tell your pastry chef, I said, licking a smear of icing off my thumb. Next time use real vanilla. They still thought I was a baker. That's the part that made me want to laugh, if I was the kind of man who laughed at people unraveling in real time. To them, I was just the ex-husband with flour on his sleeves, still nursing heartbreak and making scones in a kitchen that smelled like failure. That was the story Alara painted when she walked away, Grayson Rourke, the man with good hands but small dreams. But none of them knew what I'd built with those same hands while she was chasing chandeliers. After she left, I didn't fall apart. I just got quiet. There's a difference. Grief taught me focus. Emptiness taught me vision. I took what little savings I had, bought a crumbling brick building on the edge of town, and started with what I knew: pies, pastries, bread, things that could rise again with patience and the right heat. But I didn't stop there. The second floor of that building became a test kitchen, then a lounge, then a full guest suite. Guests became regulars. Regulars became investors. The brand grew, not loud, not flashy, just steady. We opened our first retreat in Vermont, then Oregon, then one just outside the wine valleys of California. Sage and Forge was born from ashes and silence. And unlike the Eastwells, I didn't plaster our success across headlines. We let word of mouth do the lifting. Exclusivity whispered louder than any campaign ever could. Roman Eastwell's company had been trying to buy us for the last year. Their offers came dressed in compliments and legal jargon, masking their desperation with flattery. They didn't know my name. My team had kept me insulated. Anonymity wasn't a weakness. It was armor. Until today. Now the man who thought he could buy me out like a failing boutique had to stand there and watch me taste his wedding frosting and find it lacking. The way Roman looked at me now, you'd think he'd swallowed glass. His confidence, the same arrogance that probably landed Alara, was cracking at the edges. The board members from Eastwell Global were already murmuring by the champagne tower, their perfectly pressed suits suddenly stiff with tension. They were here for show, for photographs. They didn't expect business to interrupt the celebration. But I was business now. I was the kind of threat that wore linen shirts and smelled like rosemary and oakwood in return on investment. Roman finally stepped forward. His voice was low, forced. You're Grayson Rourke, founder of Sage and Forge. I glanced over at him as I dabbed my mouth with a cloth napkin. Took you long enough. You tried to keep your identity secret, he said, jaw tight. And yet, here we are, I replied. Alara's voice cut in, sharp as broken glass. You mean he's the one who turned down our offer? Roman turned to her. We tried to acquire Sage and Forge through 3 separate holding companies. All of them rejected us. She blinked at him, then at me. You said they weren't worth the effort. He didn't respond. Because now, with me standing there, it was clear that the company he'd called a quaint little startup had outpaced their projections, was winning over their clientele, and, worst of all, was led by the man he'd underestimated most. Why? Roman asked me, eyes narrowed. Why show up now? Was this some stunt? I leaned casually against the edge of the catering table, the soft hum of awkward conversations filling the background like static. You invited me. Alara did. She spoke for you. Alara stepped forward, trying to salvage whatever control she thought she still had. This is ridiculous. You're a baker, Grayson. You can't possibly be. Sage and Forge has a standing partnership with 62 luxury retreats across the country, I interrupted. We've launched 3 culinary programs with James Beard finalists, 2 sustainable farming initiatives, and our Vermont Lodge was just listed in Forbes as one of the top 5 eco-luxury destinations of the year. So no, Alara. I'm not just a baker. I'm the man who turned your husband down because his offer lacked imagination. Fallon gasped from somewhere behind her flute. Roman's face flushed, the color returning in angry streaks. You could have taken the deal. We offered more than fair value. You offered what you thought I was worth, I said. But you didn't know who you were dealing with. He stepped closer, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the real man beneath. So this was personal. I shrugged. I prefer the word intentional. I didn't need to gloat. Every word I said was just weight settling into their lungs. Alara looked like she wanted to disappear. Her perfectly sculpted day had turned into a PR nightmare. Her groom wasn't just embarrassed, he was exposed. And I hadn't even raised my voice. Across the courtyard, I saw a journalist checking her phone, already composing headlines in her mind. There was no containing this now. Roman Eastwell's wedding had been hijacked by the ghost of his fiancée's past, and that ghost had a brand stronger than his. Alara walked to me then, her heels echoing like ticking clocks. Why now, she asked. Her voice was quieter. Tired. You could have stayed away. I could have, I admitted. But then I wouldn't have had the pleasure of telling you, in person, that I made it. Without you. Without your name. Without your approval. She looked at me like she was searching for the man she remembered. But I wasn't there anymore. That man was buried in flour and heartbreak, and I wasn't digging him up for nostalgia. Congratulations, I added. You finally made it to the top. Shame about the view. And with that, I turned and walked toward the gardens. The laughter had died. The eyes still followed, but not with ridicule anymore. With recognition. I hadn't come for revenge. I didn't need to burn anything down. I just needed them to see who lit the fire in the first place. Alara's face went pale like someone had drawn the color out with a sponge. Gone was the radiant bride, the woman gliding through her big day with curated perfection. What stood in front of me now was someone unmasked. Sputtering, cracking, scrambling to pull her threads back together before the whole gown unraveled. You said he was nobody, she said, but not to me. Her voice was aimed at Roman, barely controlled, too high in pitch. I didn't flinch. I'd heard that tone before, when she lost control of the narrative. She never did well with surprises that didn't come wrapped in a bow. Roman turned to her, voice sharp, low. He was. You told me he was some guy with a bread oven and a loyalty card for the hardware store. And that's what he was. Alara hissed. When I left him, he was boring. Safe. Predictable. I kept my hands in my pockets, my weight shifted slightly to my right heel, perfectly still. A statue in the middle of their panic. Roman looked back at me, as if checking the truth was still standing. You said he cried when you left. I did. One night. Just one. She'd never know about the other nights. The silent ones, the ones where I stared at the ceiling and rewrote every conversation we ever had, trying to find the place where love slipped out the door without saying goodbye. I cried, I said aloud, meeting Roman's eyes. Then I built something worth not crying over. The silence was heavy. And then, of course, Fallon broke it. So, wait, you're the owner of that Sage and Forge? She was trying to shift gears, trying to get ahead of the shame by hitching a ride on curiosity. Typical. Yes, I said simply. Fallon turned to Alara like a child who just realized her mother had been hiding candy. You said it was a farm cafe. Alara didn't answer. She looked lost, like someone had ripped pages out of the script, and she didn't know her next line. Reporters had edged closer now. Phones were no longer subtle. I could hear the artificial shutter sounds, see fingers typing beneath the cover of silk napkins. At least 2 Eastwell investors had stepped aside from the crowd, thumbing their devices like they were already reading about a merger gone wrong before the vows had even started. Roman grabbed Alara's arm and pulled her a few steps away. You lied to me, he muttered, trying to keep it quiet. She jerked back, nostrils flared. I didn't lie. I edited. I nearly laughed. There she was, Alara the curator. always editing her life like an art show, pruning the rough edges, shading in false light. She wasn't lying in her eyes. She was just protecting the image she'd spent years constructing. Roman didn't seem comforted. You said he was harmless. Do I look harmless to you? I said from where I stood, not needing to move. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I wandered over to the catering table, still calm, still grounded. I scanned the display: mini eclairs, cream puffs with sugared tops, trays of 2 dense macarons. Everything was fussy and underwhelming. Presentation over flavor. I picked up a cupcake, lavender frosting swirled like a wedding dress, and peeled back the paper. Took a bite. Chewed slowly. The frosting was made with artificial extract. Cheap. Floral in the wrong way. You know, I said, not looking at anyone in particular, this frosting could use real vanilla. Someone behind me snorted. I didn't turn to see who. Alara stepped forward, shaking now. You came here to ruin me. I looked at her. No, I said. You did that on your own. That landed. I saw it hit her, the realization that this wasn't revenge. This wasn't sabotage. This was exposure. All I'd done was walk in, answer a question, and eat a cupcake. The rest? That was her doing. Roman paced like a man trying to find a fire exit in a room made of mirrors. Why didn't we run a name check? He muttered. Why didn't legal flag this? Because I wasn't flaunting my name, I said. Because I wasn't interested in being seen. Until now. Alara crossed her arms, trying to collect herself, her voice cold again. So what? You show up, you flex your success, and you expect me to be what, impressed? Regretful? No, I said. I expected you to be exactly who you are. She opened her mouth to snap something back, but I cut her off. The difference is, I said, this time, I'm not trying to fix it. Her mouth closed. Someone clapped. One person. Then stopped, realizing they were the only one. Roman shook his head. We're not doing this here. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. If it still starts, one of the guests muttered under their breath. I took another bite of the cupcake. Dry. Predictably so. It's your day, I said, brushing crumbs from my fingertips. Wouldn't want to steal the spotlight. Alara took a shaky breath and straightened. This isn't over, Grayson. It is for me, I replied. I turned away, not out of disrespect but out of preservation. There was nothing left for me in that courtyard except cold gazes and warm embarrassment. I'd come for closure. Now I had it. Behind me, the whispers swirled like wind in the trees. Names were being Googled. Connections made. A few guests peeled away quietly, excusing themselves to call assistance. The story had already slipped out of their hands. As I stepped toward the garden path, someone from the catering staff passed by carrying a tray of mini lemon tarts. He glanced at me, hesitant, and said quietly, Are you really the sage and forge guy? I smiled. Only on weekends. He grinned, nodded, and walked on. And me? I headed toward the fountain at the far end of the estate, the one Alara once said looked like a crown. I sat on the stone edge, closed my eyes, and let the sun warm my face. In the distance, the wedding music began to play. And I didn't feel a thing. The ceremony was scheduled for 4:30 sharp, but it didn't start until nearly 5. I watched from the back row, my body relaxed but my mind alert, tracking the uneasy tension threading through the Eastwell estate like a hairline crack in fine porcelain. The guests looked polished, their smiles freshly reapplied, but their eyes darted, side to side, forward and back, as if waiting for something to combust. It was no longer a wedding. It was a performance on the verge of collapse. The string quartet resumed its melody, soft and slow, playing like they were afraid a single wrong note might shatter the illusion for good. Chairs were filled, camera operators repositioned, and staff re-emerged with flutes of champagne to keep the crowd compliant. A few whispered that Roman had locked himself in a study. Another said Alara had thrown a glass at the mirror in the bridal suite. Then the doors opened. Roman walked out first. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in an hour. His tuxedo was immaculate, but the polish was gone from his face. The crowd hushed as he approached the altar. No smile, no nods to friends, just a straight line toward obligation. The minister cleared his throat and glanced nervously at the planner, who gave him a tight nod. We were rolling. Then came Alara. The doors opened again, and there she stood, still glowing, still gorgeous, but the warmth had curdled. She clutched a bouquet of pale roses so tightly the stems bent in her fist. Her eyes weren't dreamy or emotional. They were locked in, like she was walking into battle. She didn't look at Roman. She didn't glance at the crowd. She looked straight ahead like the finish line had never felt so far away. She stopped beside him. They didn't hold hands. The officiant began the usual welcome, something about union and everlasting commitment, about love blooming like a flower. Ironic, considering how many were wilting in her death grip. Roman's jaw twitched when he was asked to read his vows. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small card. His voice was steady. At first, "Alara," he began, "when I met you, I was taken by your brilliance, your energy, your belief in something bigger than now. You've pushed me to be better, sharper, more present. You challenged me. You stood beside me." He paused. For a long time, the crowd held its collective breath, and I believed we were building a future based on truth. I believed everything we said to each other came from a place of honesty, of trust. His hand trembled. But now, I'm not sure. You could feel the energy shift. Heads leaned forward. Alara blinked once. Her hand gripped the bouquet harder. Roman turned slightly to the guests, then back to her. "I can't say these vows and mean them if I don't know who I'm marrying." Alara hissed something under her breath, but the mic caught it. "Roman, stop." He looked her dead in the eye. "I can't." The words echoed like thunder through the courtyard. Gasps. Audible, rippling. One woman dropped her clutch. The officiant stammered, clearly caught off guard. Do you need a moment?" Roman shook his head. "I'm sorry. I can't marry someone who lies about her past, and about people." His gaze flicked toward me for the briefest second. He wasn't subtle. Alara followed it. Her voice rose. "So that's it? You're throwing this away because he showed up?" "No," Roman said, quieter now. "Because of you." She stared at him, motionless, then dropped her bouquet to the ground. The petals scattered like torn paper. "I can't believe this," she whispered. He didn't speak again. He simply stepped back, removed the ring from his pocket, and handed it to the officiant. The silence was unbearable. Then came the murmurs, fast, unchecked. Guests leaned into one another, some with hands over mouths, others already texting furiously beneath the table. Two of the photographers had stopped shooting and were reviewing images, probably wondering how early the tension had shown up in the photos. Alara turned her eyes to me. They burned. "You think you won?" She spat across the space, her voice cracking. "You think this makes you better?" I didn't move. "No," I said evenly. "Just free." She shook her head, wild now, shaking with it. "You're pathetic." "I'm not the one being left at the altar," I said. "And I'm not the one who pretended the past didn't matter." Roman turned and walked away. Just like that. Down the aisle, past the minister, through the stunned crowd. No theatrics. Just the heavy, slow movement of a man deciding to leave before he became a footnote in someone else's lie. Alara stood there, alone in her designer gown, the backdrop of champagne towers and hanging florals now absurd behind her. No music. No applause. Just reality sinking in. She started to move, first toward Roman, then toward me, then nowhere. Her body swayed like she wasn't sure who deserved the blame more, the man who exposed the truth or the one who believed her version of it. I stood slowly. Straightened my suit. My chair scraped lightly against the stone patio, the sound cutting through the frozen air. I didn't speak again. There was nothing left to say. As I turned and walked back down the aisle, same path Roman had just taken, people parted to let me through. No smirks now. No insults. Just wide eyes and silence. A couple of guests even nodded as I passed, unsure whether to be impressed or afraid. By the time I reached the edge of the estate, the quartet had stopped playing. Staff stood awkwardly, unsure whether to start packing or pretend everything was still on track. I reached my truck, opened the door, paused, and looked back. Alara was still at the altar, frozen in place, her veil drifting slightly in the breeze like a flag on a ship that had long since sunk. I didn't stay to see who would come for her. I already knew no one could save her from what came next. It started slowly, like a champagne bottle left too long in the sun. First a hiss, then a swell, then the inevitable pop. The ceremony was over before it ever truly began, and the courtyard that had been meticulously designed for elegance now buzzed with the raw static of scandal. I stood at the edge of it all, watching the fallout from the shade of a sculpted hedge, arms folded across my chest, the last remnants of dry frosting still clinging to the roof of my mouth. Alara was still up there, a fallen queen on a ruined throne, veil slipping like a flag surrendering mid-battle. Her fists were clenched, bouquet abandoned in the grass, and for a long moment, she just stood there, trying to will the moment backward, as if she could squeeze the past 10 minutes into silence with sheer force of will. Then came the eruption. Mira rushed forward first, all faux sympathy and wide eyes. Fallon followed, flapping her hands like that might restore dignity to the scene. Someone from the press called Alera's name, twice, before being corralled by security. The guests were splitting into camps now, the ones who wanted to leave immediately before their names got tied to the wreckage, and the ones who stayed, not out of concern but because they couldn't resist watching a public undoing. I told her this was too much. One woman whispered to a man beside her. She never really loved him, he replied, too loudly. And then Alera snapped. She turned to the crowd and shouted, "He didn't leave me." He panicked. He couldn't handle what it means to be with someone real. Mira winced. Fallon's eyes widened. Roman was nowhere to be seen. He disappeared into the back gardens, his phone pressed to his ear, possibly already orchestrating damage control. Or calling his mother. Probably both. Alera's gaze swept the crowd before locking on me like a heat-seeking missile. She took the steps off the altar like she was descending from judgment itself, storming straight toward me. Her heels clicked like gunshots. "You think you won?" She hissed, her voice low enough for only me to hear as she stopped just inches from my chest. "I think you lost," I said. Her eyes burned. "This wasn't about you. This was about him. He's the coward." "No," I said. "This was always about you, Alera. You lied to him. You laughed at me. You tried to turn your version of the past into gospel. But today, the truth got a microphone." She stared at me, seething. Her hands trembled slightly, but she refused to cry. Alera never cried where cameras could catch it. She'd taught herself that years ago. Behind her, one of the champagne towers began to tip. Someone had bumped the base, maybe Mira, maybe a waiter trying to dodge the growing cluster of reporters inching closer with long lenses and eager pens. The crystal toppled in a glimmering cascade. Glass hit stone. Champagne exploded into the air like fireworks gone wrong. Screams followed, more from the absurdity than danger, and then chaos bloomed. People scattered. Dresses stained. One man slipped trying to catch a glass midair and landed hard on the ground. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Alera flinched at the sound, her head snapping around to assess the wreckage. That was when she lost it. "You think this is funny?" she shouted, turning again toward me, this time louder. I said nothing. I didn't even blink. "You came here to humiliate me." "No," I said softly. "You did that on your own." Fallon ran up, grabbing Alera's arm. "Maybe we should go inside, just for a moment. Let the staff clean this up." "I'm not hiding," Alera snapped. "Let them see it. Let them see what happens when you let men like him in." The irony nearly made me laugh. "You invited me, remember?" She jerked her arm free from Fallon, stepping closer to me again. Her mascara had begun to run, not from tears, but from the sweat clinging to her skin now that her world was melting. "You think this makes you better than me?" she asked. I took a step closer, voice low, calm, deliberate. "No. It makes me done with you." That silenced her. Not just her words, but her energy. She stood there, deflated in her couture gown, surrounded by broken glass and dripping champagne, the whispers rising like steam around us. Reporters had started filming openly now. One leaned into me. Staff scrambled to contain the mess, sweeping broken flutes and trying to salvage what was left of the catering. Meanwhile, I turned and started walking, slowly, deliberately, toward the exit. Toward peace. No need to sprint. The moment was already mine, not because I caused it, but because I survived it. Behind me, I heard Alera call after me. Not my name. Just noise. People stepped aside for me. Not with pity. With caution. With the kind of respect you don't earn by making noise, but by showing up when it counts. I reached my truck, pulled open the door, and settled into the driver's seat. The leather was warm from the sun, familiar. The engine rumbled to life on the first turn, a deep, grounded growl that reminded me exactly who I was. No theatrics, no borrowed wealth, no empty promises. Just a man who had once loved someone who couldn't see him, and who no longer needed her to. As I pulled out of the circular drive, a few cameras turned my way. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just drove. The Eastwell estate faded in my rearview mirror, a castle of mirrors cracked beyond repair. And with every mile between us, the weight on my chest grew lighter. Let her have her champagne-stained courtyard and half-eaten cake. I had closure, and I didn't need an audience to taste it. The next morning, the smell of warm cinnamon and fresh ground espresso filled the cafe before the sun had fully broken over the rooftops. I moved through the kitchen like I always did, precise, steady, hands dusted with flour, heart lighter than it had been in years. Sage and Forge's flagship location wasn't some sprawling fortress of wealth like the Eastwell estate. It didn't need to be. It was built on truth, stone, reclaimed wood, sunbeams, and the kind of quiet pride that comes from knowing every single thing in this space was earned. The ovens were already humming, their breath soft and fragrant. My staff, small but loyal, moved around me in a kind of unspoken rhythm. No forced smiles. No performance. Just honest work. And that was the thing. In all the chaos yesterday, all the screaming and the shattered glass, I'd never raised my voice. I hadn't needed to. Truth has its own volume, and it's loudest when you say nothing at all. Customers trickled in by 8. Regulars, mostly. Locals who came for the sourdough, the coffee steeped in French presses with handwritten labels, the lemon-lavender muffins that Elise made in the corner with her headphones on, and a humming tune no one else could hear. No one asked about the wedding. Not yet. But I saw the subtle glances, the recognition. A couple had seen something online, probably. I'd become a headline without even trying. The man who showed up. That's what one of the early morning blog posts called me. A viral clip was already making the rounds. Someone had caught Roman's "I can't," and my calm walk through the crowd with a camera phone. I hadn't seen it. I didn't need to. I'd lived it. By 10:30, the cafe was full. Warm laughter, clinking mugs, indie guitar plucking low in the background. Then a car pulled into the gravel lot outside. A sleek black sedan. Not one of ours. The door opened slowly. And there she was. Alara. No veil. No makeup. Just her. She wore jeans, a sweatshirt too large for her frame, and a pair of flats that had once probably lived in the back of a designer closet. She looked 10 years older than she had the day before, not because she'd aged, but because the illusion had finally cracked and there was nothing left holding it up. I didn't flinch. Didn't pause. Just wiped my hands on a towel and stepped from behind the counter. She stood at the door like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. For the first time in her life, she looked uncertain in her own skin. I nodded once, silently inviting her in. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes scanning the space. It was warm, sunlit, real. She looked at the open shelves, the hand-labeled jars of nutmeg and cardamom, the chalkboard menu with imperfect handwriting. She looked at the customers, smiling, relaxed, at home. Then she looked at me. "You came to destroy me," she said. Her voice was hoarse. Not bitter. Just tired. "No," I said. "You did that on your own." She didn't argue. For once. I motioned toward a stool at the end of the bar. She took it without hesitation. Elise slid a mug of hot coffee down without a word, nodding to me before returning to the kitchen. Alara cradled the mug in her hands, looking down at the steam like it held a future she couldn't quite grasp. "I saw the video," she said. "They're everywhere." I didn't answer. She looked around again. "This place, it's beautiful." I shrugged. "It's honest." A pause. Long, heavy. "I never thought you'd make it this far," she admitted. I nodded. "That's the thing. You never saw me." "Not really." She winced. Not visibly, not theatrically. Just a flicker in her eyes. "I was so sure back then," she said, "that I was trading in stagnation for something bigger, for a man who could give me the world." "You didn't want the world," I said quietly. "You wanted the reflection of it." Another silence. This one more fragile. She reached into her bag and pulled out a plain white envelope, slid it across the counter. I didn't touch it. "It's the money you loaned me," she said. "With interest." I stared at it, unmoved. "You think I need that?" I asked. "I think I owe it." I pushed it back gently. "Donated to the shelters Roman's company tried to bulldoze for condos." She blinked. "You knew about that?" "I know a lot more than I say." She swallowed hard. "Grayson, No," I said. "Don't apologize. Not because it fixes anything. And not because I need to hear it." She looked down at her coffee again, eyes glassy. "I don't have anyone else to talk to." "That's the problem," I said. "You never learned how to be with people you couldn't control." She didn't deny it. She just let the truth settle, like ash on the table. For a while, we sat in silence. Customers came and went. The sun shifted on the floor tiles. The smell of baked apples drifted from the back ovens. When she stood, she didn't ask for a hug. Didn't ask for a second chance. She just took one last sip of coffee, set the mug down with both hands, and whispered, "This is the last time I'll see you." I nodded. "I know." And she left. No dramatics. No slammed door. Just the soft chime of the bell as it swung behind her. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty stool she left behind, the untouched envelope still sitting on the counter. Then I reached under the glass case, pulled out a cupcake, a new batch we'd been testing with spiced brown sugar and lemon zest, and walked it to a customer who'd just arrived with his little girl. She grinned when I set it down. "Is this the one with the twist in the middle?" I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "That's the one." I found the envelope a few hours after she left. Still sitting there, untouched on the counter, its edges slightly curled from the warmth of the cafe. I didn't rush to open it. I didn't need what was inside. Not the check, not the gesture. What I needed, I already had. The sound of the oven timers. The smell of cinnamon butter cooling on croissants. The laughter of regulars echoing beneath wooden beams I sanded by hand. Still, I took the envelope upstairs to my office after the last customer had left. The cafe was quiet now, the kind of silence that felt earned. Sunlight pooled on the wood floors, and downstairs, the kitchen lights glowed low, night mode. I sat at my desk, fingers hesitating just briefly before slipping under the seal. Inside was a check. She'd written the full amount I'd loaned her years ago, money she once claimed she'd pay back in gratitude, not dollars. But it came with interest now. A lot of it. She had used Roman's money or her own, maybe a little of both. Either way, it had the sin of guilt all over it. Beneath the check was a note, her handwriting still that familiar cursive, only shakier now. I told myself I left for a better life. But really, I left because I was afraid you'd outgrow me. You did. I just didn't think I'd have to watch. I folded the letter once, slid it back into the envelope, set the check aside. In the morning, I drove to one of the city's transitional shelters, the one that had barely survived the rezoning scare last year thanks to Roman Eastwell's development arm. I handed the check to the woman behind the desk, a weary-eyed manager named Paula I'd met once during a fundraiser. "For the expansion," I said. "Anonymous." She looked at the amount and blinked back tears. "You sure?" I nodded. "Very." It was a new kind of vow, one I made without a ring or an altar or an audience. A vow to myself. That I would no longer feed the parts of me that once needed Alara's approval. That I would turn everything she used as a weapon, my silence, my simplicity, my consistency, into strength. Not out of spite. Out of purpose. When I returned to the cafe, the first thing I saw was Jules, my newest apprentice, struggling to load trays of biscotti into the display case. "You're stacking too many per row," I said, walking over. "The bottom ones crumble." He looked up, embarrassed. "Sorry. I thought they'd fit." "They do," I said. "But we're not here to just make it fit. We're here to make it right." He nodded, adjusting his rhythm. I stood beside him for a few minutes, showing him how to angle the cookies so the chocolate-dipped ends caught the morning light just enough to tempt. This was the life I'd built. Not glamorous. Not loud. But real. Tangible. And full of people who saw value in the details. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside with a cup of black coffee and leaned against the wooden railing by the herb garden. The lavender had just started to bloom. Bees danced lazily from sprig to sprig, oblivious to how much symbolism they carried with them. Elise joined me a few minutes later, sipping a latte. "She looked different," she said. "Alara." She nodded. "She looked smaller," Elise added. Because she was used to being the only one in the room who believed her own story, I replied. Elise looked at me. "You okay?" I took a sip. The coffee was bold, clean. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm honest." She smiled. "We're testing a new cupcake recipe. Want the first one?" I thought you'd never ask. Inside, the staff buzzed with their usual flow. No one was trying to impress anyone. No one needed to prove they belonged. They just did. Before I tried the cupcake, I took off my apron and hung it by the window. The afternoon sun lit it like a flag of quiet resilience. The cupcake was good. Not perfect yet. Needed something sharp to cut through the sweet, maybe orange zest or a bourbon glaze. "I have an idea," I said, already heading toward the test kitchen. This was my vow now. Not to a person, but to a life. To work that didn't require applause to be meaningful. To relationships that didn't hinge on proving your worth. To mornings that started with oven warmth instead of cold silence. A vow to lead without controlling. To love without performing. To grow, even in places where I once only buried things. Alara had been a chapter, but I was the author. And I just picked up the pen again. Weeks passed, then a month. The wedding became a headline, then a whisper, then a footnote in the life Alara no longer controlled. The internet did what it always does, fed on scandal until something juicier came along. But I didn't pay attention to that. Not really. I had flour to weigh, recipes to test, and new hands in the kitchen who asked real questions, not loaded ones. Life didn't just go on, it moved forward, and I moved with it. On a quiet Thursday morning, I walked into Sage and Forge to find a copy of Culinary and Culture waiting on the front counter, tucked between the daily order sheets and a box of organic chocolate deliveries. Elise had left it there like a gift, a note stuck to the front in her looping handwriting. "You're on page 42. And the cover." I paused. The cover. There I was. Caught in a moment I didn't even remember, standing behind our counter, apron on, sleeves rolled up, laughing with Jules as he accidentally spilled a tray of almond biscotti. It wasn't a staged shot. It wasn't touched up. I looked like myself, which, apparently, was the entire point. The headline read, "The Man Who Showed Up, How Grace and Rourke Built Sage and Forge with Silence, Soil, and Soul." I flipped to the article, heart steady. It wasn't ego that stirred me. It was validation, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't scream or boast, but settles into your bones like warmth on a cold day. They talked about our retreats, about the way we source ingredients, about how we mentor young chefs from small towns and underserved communities, about our insistence on real vanilla, real butter, real work. No shortcuts, no posturing, no pretending. It was the kind of press Roman Eastwell would have killed for. I set the magazine aside and poured myself a cup of coffee. The blend was one of our newer roasts, lightly fruity, Ethiopian origin, just bold enough to hold its own beside a raspberry scone. I stepped outside, sat on the bench near the herb beds, and let the morning do what it does best, arrive without asking for permission. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need applause. What I had now was far better: rhythm, purpose, and the sound of something real growing in the soil I once thought held nothing. An hour later, a little girl named Maya walked through the front door with a green apron tied crookedly around her waist. She was barely 12, sharp-eyed and shy, the daughter of our newest pastry apprentice. She begged to help with the cupcakes that day, and I told her yes before her mother could finish the question. She ran up to me, cheeks flushed. "Mr. Grayson, I think my batter rose too high." I smiled, standing from the bench. "Let's go see what happened." Inside, the kitchen buzzed with a kind of quiet joy, mixing bowls clinking, ovens ticking, and laughter echoing between tiled walls. Jules was helping with bread loaves. Elise tested a new rosemary glaze. Maya stood beside a tray of golden cupcakes that had puffed a little too much, their tops spilling like muffin crowns. I leaned in, examined one, then tore a piece off and popped it into my mouth. I said, chewing thoughtfully. "Still delicious." Maya blinked. "Even though they don't look perfect?" "Especially because they don't," I said. "Perfection's for statues. Cupcakes are meant to be enjoyed." She beamed, and I handed her a piping bag. "Let's add frosting. We'll call them bloom tops. Makes it sound intentional." She giggled and got to work, her hands shaky but determined. That was the moment I knew. The real one. Not the wedding. Not the press. Not the morning Alara left or the day I opened the cafe. This. Watching a girl decorate a cupcake that wasn't perfect, but was completely hers, and knowing she felt seen, valued. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It wasn't about showing Alara what she'd lost or reminding Roman of what he never understood. It was about building something from the pieces they left behind and realizing I hadn't just recovered, I'd flourished. Around noon, a delivery driver brought in a small box addressed to me. No return label. Inside was a handwritten card and a single bottle of wine aged, expensive, rare. The card read, "No hard feelings. Hope you find what you're looking for. R.E." I chuckled. Roman's handwriting was as controlled as his PR team. I walked to the back, poured the wine into the cooking stockpot without a second thought, and returned to slicing fresh herbs for the lunch menu. Whatever closure Roman wanted to send my way, I already had it. The next few weeks unfolded like pages in a story I was finally writing on my own terms. We started a mentorship program for rural culinary students. Local farmers partnered with us to supply seasonal produce. Elise's rosemary glaze became a staple. Maya's bloom tops sold out every weekend. Sage and Forge expanded, not in size, but in soul. And every day I woke up, laced my boots, and walked through the cafe doors knowing I hadn't just survived the end of a marriage. I'd risen from it. Late one evening, after we'd closed and the last chairs were stacked, I sat alone at the counter with a warm apple tart and a scoop of our house vanilla bean ice cream. No music played. No one else lingered. Just the hum of the freezer, the soft tick of the cooling ovens, and the peace of a man who'd finally stepped into the life he was meant to live. Not simple, not small, just whole. I took a bite of the tart, flaky, buttery, layered with cinnamon apples that melted on the tongue. The sweetest ending. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine.